Okay, I thought what we could talk about tonight was a topic that was suggested before last week's evening talk. But the topic itself was broad enough that I felt like it deserved an entire evening to really explore it. And the topic is this contemplation about a perfect world. Because there's a lot of argument there. I mean, some teachers, historic teachers, might say that the world doesn't even exist. Others might describe it differently. But there is a pretty consistent tradition of wisdom teachers talking about the world being, from a certain perspective, perfect. It may not be our ordinary perspective. In fact, even to suggest that the world is perfect, given what we see on the nightly news, sounds absurd. Even to raise the question, even to suggest that it's possible to talk for 45, 50 minutes about it. So I wanted to just quote Nisargadatta first, because he's pretty direct about saying certain things. And so one of the things he said is, your world is transient, changeful. My world is perfect, changeless. You can tell me what you like about your world. I shall listen carefully, even with interest. Yet not for a moment shall I forget that your world is not. My world is real, while yours is made of dreams. Pretty specific statement, right? So rather than, just jumping into an argument about whether the world is perfect or not, I think it's necessary to look at how we sort of view, as a species, view the world that we live in, and how our concepts about it tend to create that world. So one of the first things about humans is that we like our life to perpetuate. Sort of the biological imperative of this organism, human organisms, is to continue our life. And so we tend to serve that. We tend to do things to protect that. And then, there's a commandment in the Old Testament, thou shalt not kill. Well, it turns out in most cases, most of the ways that people look at that, it's sort of a spectrum of how we take that statement to be. If we're talking about, our own individual personal life, then yeah, we want to perpetuate that. We don't, to be killed we would see that as a misfortune. And then, we can extend that same attitude out to family, close friends, maybe even out to other people within our own community or within our own culture or religion. The people that are further afield, the ones in, let's say, foreign countries or other cultures, or, we're not quite as concerned as we are about our own immediate family to, protect those lives. And then we have our enemies. that we create for some conceptual reason. And those if things get bad enough, as a culture, as a country, we're willing to, train young people that it's okay to kill those people, right? A little bit further from home, we can talk more about, why we choose to do that, how that all comes about. And then we look at animals. It's, we, as most people would be reluctant to, kill animals that look a lot like us, like chimpanzees and primates, or animals that are intelligent, like dolphins or whales. But we're more okay with killing animals that we see as pests, like, I don't know, rats, cockroaches. We're just, most of us are just fine with that, especially if they dare to come into a structure that we're inhabiting. We feel entitled then. Not everybody, I'm just talking generally here. And then, we can talk about many people, not all clearly, are okay with killing and eating certain animals. We tend to like to outsource the actual killing of them to some out-of-sight butcher, but the eating of meat for a lot of people is perfectly acceptable. But even if we're not meat eaters, that everyone is okay with eating plants. Eating plants doesn't always require killing the plant to eat it, but even, let's say, a fruit tree often requires killing the insects that would otherwise eat the fruit on the tree. So, yeah, we'd sort of have to look down the chain to really see the implications of thou shalt not kill. It tends to be a spectrum of how we feel about it. If we're actually a country at war, one of the things that we do is induct young people, primarily because they're a lot more malleable than older people, to basically decondition and recondition them, decondition them from any beliefs that they might have that killing is wrong, and recondition them to believe that killing under certain circumstances is not only okay, but an imperative that your fellow soldiers are depending on you to act without hesitancy in that moment. So the military has gotten quite good at deconditioning and reconditioning. 8 weeks, done deal. And then we can look at how animals basically feed on other animals. I mean, we can have the hawk eating the snake eating the frog eating the insect. I mean, it's a chain of consumption. So it seems like just overall the survival of species on this planet is, you could say, very fundamentally based on eating other life forms. And we humans seem to be okay with that generally, except when it gets too close to home, except when it involves humans, and especially loved ones, and particularly myself. That's sort of our priorities in general. But when we start to look at what what that is. We can just see this full spectrum of our relationship to that. So it's not a a black and white issue that killing under all circumstances is bad. I know some religions believe that, but it's really hard when we really look deeply at our what we eat and what other animals eat to ignore the fact that in this world, on this planet, it's the way it seems to be set up. There's we tend to give God credit for creation, but if we do that, we should feel like we also need to give credit for destruction. One begets the other. And I would even say that destruction is necessary in order to allow the creation of further manifest forms, further creation. If there was creation and no destruction, there'd be a storage problem after a while. If we think that plastics in the ocean are a problem, if things were created but nothing was destroyed, there would soon not be any space left for any further creation. So that cyclical nature of existence, non-existence, birth, death, recreation seems to be an essential aspect of this planet. If we watch on the Nature Channel, a lion pouncing on a cute baby antelope, it is shocking. Just the sheer violence of the attack is shocking. But we don't go the next step and say that the lion shouldn't have done that. We don't label it as an immoral act. We can say, no, that is the nature of animals to feed on other animals. So when we as humans, let's say we're faced with an attacker, right? There is a visceral response to fight back, especially if we're capable of that. I understand that if we're, deeply trained in a nonviolent tradition, we may not act on that urge, but that I'd suggest that immediate response of self-protection is deep within us. It's for the survival of this particular life form, this cellular desire to continue. So let's move the goalposts a little bit more. So how about if if I'm confronted by someone who is just let's say assaulting our self-image, has something derogatory to say about us, doesn't like our religion or race or beliefs or our football team or where we live or who knows what. But there's this energy coming toward us that is threatening to our psychological well-being, right? The response, is different than, the self-protection against a physically violent attack, where we might be motivated even to, forcefully attack the other person. In this case, probably not, but that urge is still there. It's this sort of almost rageful reaction. It can be that strong if we're triggered enough, right? Anybody felt that? But what exactly are we protecting? We're protecting the image that we have about ourselves, our separate self, right? we're not talking about physical threat now, we're talking about psychological well-being and how to protect that. So let's move a little farther away conceptually. Let's take the case of, let's say, I don't know, a genetic engineer that's working for a agricultural chemical company, working on a scientifically challenging, mentally stimulating research having to do with producing genetically modified crops that will allow the spraying of pesticide to kill everything but that crop. And his paycheck is based on the quality of his research. His 401k plan, if it's invested in the company, is based on that too. Self-image is based on it. Everyone likes to feel that their career, if they've really devoted themselves to it, has value. And so if someone questions that, there's a really strong tendency to react in the direction of your wallet and your self-image rather than the truth of whatever may be said, if it's in any way in opposition to the fruits of your career. Okay, so that's just like an individual professional person sort of defending their self-image from a more vague, you could say, attacker. Okay, now we're no longer talking about, life-threatening attacks. We're talking about, emotionally challenging attacks. Okay, we'll take one more example. Let's say a country, I don't know, any country, big company, wealthy country, has an interest in importing oil at a cheap price to support its citizens' lifestyle. If that supply of oil is threatened in some way, that country may decide that it is in its self-interest, its well-being of its citizens, its corporations, to go to war to protect that supply. Maybe not that they really, really need it, but they need it to sort of maintain the comfortable lifestyle that its citizens have grown used to. Generally it's not stated that bleakly. Normally it's stated in terms of, providing an opportunity for a new political structure, a new democratic structure to a yearning population. Then that decision can result in, killing innocent people, killing drafted soldiers from that other country. But that's deemed justifiable by a country in order to protect its economic lifestyle interests. So, we can see this sequence of examples, but the difference between the latter, a country going to war to protect its lifestyle, is not all that different from the individual, reacting when someone insults them or someone questions their integrity or their opinion about something. It's a matter of degree, right? It's a matter of, the scale of consequences, but the movement is the same, right? I want to protect what I hold most dear from my perspective, from this individual separate self perspective, whether the separate self is an individual, once removed professional person, a country, a religion. The movement is the same. Consequences are certainly different, but the movement is the same. So we can see this tendency of humans to move out of a sense of both greed and fear, you know, deeply motivating forces for humans, where there's this need to protect what we feel is necessary for our existence, or at least our existence as we'd like it to be. You know, we enjoy a certain level of comfort. We want to maintain that. We enjoy a certain, you know, self-opinion. We like to not have that threatened. So that desire to protect that which is closest to us from our own individual perspective, amplified by numbers of people with, you know, sort of summation of those beliefs in their own right to act in a certain way, to believe in a certain way. Sum total of that creates the world as we see it today. You know, it didn't happen overnight. You know, there was a gradual shift that was, you know, most of us really didn't see it coming. You know, maybe we saw it coming and didn't care, maybe both. So, but there's been this movement towards a sense of okayness about taking what we want as an individual or as a country or as a society from this world. And I'd suggest that there's several sources for that sense, that belief. One, I would say the primary one is this belief in a separate self, that what I am is separate from this outside world that appears out there as an objective, you know, real, stable, external thing. And I'm here, and, you know, alone, separate from all of that. And my job as a organism in this world is to sort of make my way as best I can. There's also this belief that's been, you know, well propagated over the last at least 2,000 years, that humans are special, that somehow we've been told that humans, us, have the right to have dominion over all other species over the earth. In other words, we're entitled, we've been granted a special entitlement to extract whatever we need from the earth, from other animals, from other plants, sort of without regard to the well-being of other plants and animals. And we've sort of taken that directive and run with it. Right? I've often thought if there was a reality show where every species had one vote, that humans would be the first species voted off the planet. Who would vote for us? The other movement is this movement of science, where, you know, maybe for the last 500 years ago, science at one time was closely aligned with philosophy and religion. It was all the exploration of this life, and it wasn't seen really as separate from a deeper sense of life, of nature. But that changed about 500 years ago, where science was really divorced from, you know, let's say the more intuitive aspects of this life, divorced from things like, I don't know, caring for the earth, caring for other people, caring for other species, love, compassion, belief in a divine nature. So those two things went their separate ways, and science sort of made its own rules. Like, hey, we've got the scientific method; it's the right one, and if it falls, whatever needs to be looked at, if it falls within the scientific method of being able to be measured and experiments replicated, then we can say that that's true. But if you can't test a theory using the scientific method, then it's not really verifiable. Therefore, we've just separated out, I would say, most of the really important things about life, about, love and care for other people and compassion and, search for unity. All that's disregarded because it doesn't fit in with this standard of definition for what is real that has been created within the scientific field. I'm not saying that the scientific method doesn't have usefulness. It's created lots of wonderful things. It's also created lots of issues. Our belief is, well, yeah, maybe it created some issues, but created a lot of good things too. So the solution is probably more technology. So we're sort of placing our hope for redemption in more science. It's sort of like weeds are getting resistant to genetically modified crops. Therefore, the solution are better and stronger genetically modified crops. But seems to be a flaw in that analysis, right? The fourth element I'd like to mention is just among humans, there's also not universal, I'm talking generally through all of this, but a sense of life is scarce. It's not abundant. It's a lot of people believe in a dog-eat-dog world. Limited supply. Darwinian. Competition. Success of the fiercest. And so there's that tendency also. So we have a separate self combined with this survival instinct, combined with this biblical directive that humans have dominion over all things, combined with the dominance of science, combined with a sense of scarcity. And, out of that, it has grown this movement, especially among those that have the power, is just this belief in more, like more things that we can own, control, consume, that will yield my greater happiness, my company's greater happiness, my country's greater happiness. And if other people suffer, then so be it. Survival of the fittest. Right? So, okay, here we're going to make a jump into another way of looking at this thing altogether. So here's a proposal. I propose, contrary to what we've been talking about so far, I would propose that the world can be considered as good to the extent that it is conducive to our awakening to our true nature. And the world can be considered detrimental to the extent that it maintains the trance of self-identification. So Rumi said that there is one thing in this world you must never forget to do. If you forget everything else and not this, there's nothing to worry about. But if you remember everything else and forget this, then you will have done nothing in this life. Pretty dramatic statement, right? if you've done everything else and not done this one thing, you would have missed the opportunity in this lifetime. So what's the one thing that he's talking about? You know, it's really the recognition of what we truly are, the recognition that we're not a separate self. You know, so if that is the one essential thing to be accomplished in this lifetime, then is the world perfect or not? You know? So I'd suggest that the world, in that sense, is the perfect vehicle for our awakening. A perfect vehicle to shift us out of our trance in the belief that what we are is a separate self, walking around in a somewhat alien world, trying to get by, do the best we can. You know, so the fact that the world is as it is, I would suggest is the net result of all of our, as humans, all of our actions and beliefs and what we say as a whole creates the world as we see it around us. You know, when we look around at the problems that, you know, the major sort of species-threatening problems that exist in the world today. I mean, things like climate change, nuclear proliferation, contamination of our food supply, loss of health and immunity, toxicity in our water supply, those kind of issues. When we look at all of those, one thing that they all have in common is that they're all human created. You know, animals didn't do it. Plants didn't do it. You know, they're all human created. And I'd suggest that they were all created from humans that were trying to make things better. You know, it's not some evil force. It's people trying to make things better for themselves, often for their company, for their country, etc. But you look back on history and we can see that more than likely there were more people killed in the name of promoting our God over your God, or promoting the primacy of my ideology over your ideology. More than, you know, diseases and plagues and crimes and all other causes of death. More people killed in the name of human concepts, believed, acted upon, right? Believed that I know what's right, I know what's needed to improve the world, to make the world a better place, or at least make my situation in the world a better thing. But, you know, where's the actual origin of that movement? It's not even in the body, right? You know, it's from our mental concepts that we believe in it, their rightness, and in our rightness in acting on those as a culture or country, whatever, or individually. So we can just recognize the world at large as being the sum total of that movement, that belief in the primacy of our own thoughts. So the solution is, you know, we can change our laws, we can change our politicians, that's all fine. But at the end of the day, what is fundamentally needed is a recognition of who we actually are. And there's the quote attributed to Einstein that says that essentially that problems that are created by a level of thinking cannot be solved by that same level of thinking. Need to be solved from a different perspective, let's just say a higher perspective. So when we look at the sort of life-threatening issues going on right now on this planet, they're not going to be resolved by more technology. They're not actually even going to be solved by more laws. You know, what's really required is a shift in the recognition of what we actually are, the recognition that we're not individual, separate beings, that we're in fact indivisible from all other living things on this planet. You know, that changes everything. You know, so I'd suggest that the issues that are coming clearly into view now as, you know, species-threatening issues are shocking, but hopefully shocking enough that it causes us to be willing to look from a different perspective. You know, to realize that we just can't keep going down this road and expect a different outcome. You know, we can also look at the world from, let's say, a personal, emotional standpoint. You know, we either personally faced or know many people that have faced just a sense of just hollowness or hopelessness or depression, dissatisfaction with themselves or the world or their place in it. And again, I would suggest that this is not pleasant, certainly, but it's also sort of life's way of nudging us out of our status quo, you know, to you know, make things in a sense unpleasant enough that we don't want to remain there anymore. That we begin being willing to look at things from a different perspective. So often what drives people into spirituality, you know, I've searched outside, you know, for excitement, adventure, accomplishment, you know, whatever our idea of happiness is, and when that comes up lacking, maybe then we are willing to look in a different direction. So if we see that the world that we perceive out there is really viewed through our conditioning, I mean, that's why it's said that it has a dreamlike quality. You know, we all believe that we're looking at the same worlds, but we're not. You know, we're all looking from, you know, through our individually colored lens based on our own conditioning. And the world that appears to us is a reflection of that. Right? So, you know, if we believe the world is a dangerous place, the world looks dangerous. You know, if we believe that, you know, I'm not a lovable person, then the world responds that way. If we believe that we're limited and can't do something, the world shows us that actually that's true, we can't. So the world, in that sense, is a perfect reflection of our beliefs about what it is. And in some sense, it externalizes our concepts and gives us the opportunity to see what the concepts are that we're holding. You know, we blame it on the outside world, but the origin is really within ourselves, the beliefs within our head, right? So when we begin to look more closely at what's going on, let's say inside of us, we can see that the mind's limitation is that it is a conceptual thinking organism. And what we're talking about is the need to move beyond, see beyond mental concepts, to see unity that isn't apparent when we're looking for differences. So at some point we may recognize that the resolution will not be found in the thinking mind. At the same time, we can see that the resolution actually won't be found out in the world. If we're waiting for the world to be perfect according to who? Perfect according to my standards, the way I want it to look perfect. If we're waiting for that to happen, we're going to wait for a very, very long time. So we can see that that isn't a realistic approach. We can also look around and see that the world is impermanent, right? Things have a lifespan, things come and go, birth, life, and death. All living things. When we really consider that, we may not be so keen on trying to find our solid ground in an impermanent world. I was there in nearby where I lived in the town. There was a billboard up for a year or so, and the billboard proclaimed God is pro-life. And every time I drove past that billboard, a thought went through my head as that it seems to be pro-death too. It's almost a one-to-one correlation there. And sort of a reminder of just the impermanence of this life. And is that impermanence also not sort of a directive, an invitation, a pointer towards looking for something that's not subject to birth, life, and death? Something that may nudge our attention back to awareness, back to spirit, whatever we want to call it. So I'd say that the world has these different aspects. One is it's a perfect reflection of our beliefs about it. We can also see that our minds are capable only of conceptual thought, not capable of non-conceptual experience. There's nothing for it to do, right? And the third thing is that this quality of impermanence in the world doesn't give us a foothold there. So we're left with not being able to look outside of ourselves, not being able to look to our mind, not being able to look to the next experience, which is also impermanent. And life sort of corners us into having to consider the primacy of awareness, consciousness, Buddha nature, Christ consciousness, whatever we choose to call it. Something that's not of this manifest world. So in all of those ways, the world as we see it, the mind as it projects the world, is a perfect pointer back to what we truly are. So in that way, the world serves always to cause us to look back at what's more essential, what's more true. It's not the world that's imperfect. It's the mind that projects its images on the world that's flawed. The world that's doing their job, without the human mind, the world, organisms may be eating other organisms, but there's a certain balance to that. You look out in nature, nothing seems to be out of place. Nothing except the imposition of mind-created objects, mind-created problems. So, this question of perfection, I would say that the world is perfectly constructed to point us back to what's actually true. That being our true nature. And the difficulties in the world is, in some sense, the way existence works to be more insistent that it really is time to look. It is really urgent. It's not the time to dilly-dally or to wait for the world to change or to expect the next law or politician or to get it right. What needs to be changed is our willingness to look at what we really are, the willingness to consider the possibility that what we are isn't a separate individual with personal needs and desires and the entitlement to take from the world. In some sense, we've been on this masculine track for quite some time, in terms of outward looking, in terms of science inventing, building, creating, all of that. And what's been neglected is, you could say, a more feminine caring for each other, caring for the planet, caring for other species, recognition of the significance of love and compassion, and the divine nature of us all, the inseparability of life as a whole, on this planet. So this awareness, can't really say it's perfect. It's talking about awareness as perfect is perfect compared to what? If this awareness consciousness is the entirety of what is experiencing everything, what could you even compare it to? So even there, the word perfect is not quite right. It's also not a static awareness, it's an alive awareness. It's the potential within which everything comes into existence. But from the perspective of that awareness, looking back at this world, you might even say that this world is perfectly imperfect. Imperfect, but there's a certain logic to it too. It's imperfect in a way that is nudging us as humans towards a deeper understanding. If we allow ourselves to see that and not get caught up in the sort of the froth of the arisings within that, but really see how that's pointing us back to ourselves. That's the gift, when we allow ourselves to consider the possibility that that world, as chaotic, as imperfect as it appears to be, is working, is the perfect vehicle for our own awakening. If everything was nice and pleasant, there'd be no motivation. It's really, sometimes that there's enough of a discomfort, that causes us to wake up.